So I nudged myself to sit here today, having been inspired by many of the monastics here who have shared their grief, sadness, and disbelief about the social and political upheaval happening in the United States, and also their strong message of how the Dharma can provide us with a source of refuge amidst the uncertainty of the world, and how the Dharma can provide us with a method to cultivate and keep returning to some level of inner calm and peace, and then being able to share that peace with others. And recently, Sravasti Abbey partnered with Buddhist Global Relief to hold an online Action to Feed the Hungry, an online gathering to raise awareness about the need to alleviate the suffering of malnutrition and lack of access to food and water across the world, and increasingly due to COVID right here within the United States itself. And in this gathering, which you can find online on our YouTube channel in the Engaged Buddhism playlist, Bhikkhu Bodhi gave a very rousing explanation of the origins of Buddhist Global Relief, sparked by an article that he wrote about the need for Western Buddhists to not just leave Buddhism as an intellectual plaything, I think was the exact words that he used, to not just leave it as an inner journey, but to use whatever resources that they have to actively alleviate the suffering in the world. And just a few days ago, in the annual Western Buddhist monastic gathering, which we're holding online at the moment, today was the last day, there was a group discussion about social change. And in that group, it was acknowledged that a level of confusion and sometimes even conflict can arise when the community of lay supporters feel that monastics should not be commenting on or in any way involved in what is described as political. And a few monastics mentioned that they had been actively criticized for speaking publicly on social issues, as apparently that is not the place of a monastic. So I rejoice in the clarity of someone who very eloquently expressed that an important root of misunderstanding is that social justice issues are being seen as political, whereas really they are ethical and human rights issues. Thus, there's this need to take these issues that are seen as political outside of that political framework and to more appropriately situate them in an ethical framework that is relevant to all people, including monastics. And so I'm giving this context here because of what I'm wanting to do through this talk, which is to ask you to vote and to help others to vote as well. So the people here at the Abbey, I know that I'm preaching to the choir, but largely I am largely speaking to the many friends that we have online. And to give you a bit more context, I'm an Australian citizen and I grew up in a democracy that has compulsory voting. When you turn 18, you are expected to register to vote, and you are expected to participate in local, state, and federal elections. If you don't, there is a small fine of $20, just enough to get most people there. And if you refuse to pay, you will actively be taken to court, and some people are jailed. There's a lot more flexibility there than it seems. If you're out of state, if you're not available for various reasons, you can appeal the fine, and that can get waived. It's very common. If you're out of the country for an extended period of time, you can get your name taken off the electoral roll. There's a lot of freedom there. And you can actually turn up. All that you need to do is turn up, get your name ticked off, get the ballot papers in your hand, and then whatever you do with them is your choice. You can write nasty things all over them and put them in the box. You can rip them up. You can do a donkey vote, which is just putting all the candidates in the number that they're listed. There's many ways to engage or disengage, even though you're required to turn up. So I have this as my background, with memories of going with my mom and dad to the local school or kindergarten center that was turned into the local voting center, seeing them get their names ticked off the roll, watching them vote in their private little booths. Yeah, so I've kind of been cooked in this system of social and political engagement that, as one Australian professor of politics phrased, demonstrates a social expectation that at a minimum, everyone needs to participate every few years, and that's a good thing. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. We're all affected by the government and the social, political, and economic policies that they put into place. So it's natural that everyone should share their voice about what direction the government is going in. So it's been interesting for me to learn that in the USA, which is commonly understood to be one of the largest and most powerful democratic countries in the world, that there's actually quite low national participation in key democratic processes, such as voting to elect political leaders and the policies that they represent. So, for example, according to one article in 2018, more than 96% of eligible Australians are enrolled to vote. And of those, more than 90% typically turn out to cast their ballots for a federal election, far more than the 55% of eligible Americans who participated in the 2016 presidential election. So my purpose here is not to celebrate how great Australia is. The system there definitely has its flaws and its own discriminations. In looking at, doing a bit of research for this, I found that it was only in 1962 that the Indigenous Australians, or the Aborigines, in all states had the right to vote in federal elections, 1962. And it was only after 1983 that they were required to enroll like all other citizens. That discrimination there against the Indigenous population is very, very deep, and not something that is commonly, as growing up there, that I didn't have an awareness of. And also, from my own experience as an 18-year-old being able to vote for the first time, having to vote, I felt entirely unprepared. From my own side, I had made no effort to educate myself, but also from the family and the education system side of things, I didn't feel like I was supported or prepared. I remember asking my mum when I was getting close to the elections for the first time, who she was voting for and why. And she told me that she's first-generation Australian from her family immigrated from England. She said that her father told her that you don't talk about these things, that they're private and you do it behind closed doors. Conversation closed. I said, okay. And then in my last few years of high school, when I was 17 or 18, I don't remember any classes, any discussions, any support about this huge thing that we're going to be entering into and participating. Nothing to inspire our enthusiasm to participate in the privilege of democracy. So not having lived in Australia for a long time, I have no idea what the education system is there right now in terms of supporting youth, those of coming of age to vote. But I do see that as an area that is needed to support, especially if you have compulsory voting, to support that. But even where you don't, to inspire people to want to engage, to actively participate in the world that they're living in. And I wanted to share some perspectives from Australians on the voting process that I found inspiring. And these are just from interviews with people on the street. And perspectives that point to a culture around social and political engagement that seems so inclusive and beneficial for the well-being of many people. One person says, voting in Australia is like a party. There's a barbecue at the local school. Everyone turns up. Everyone votes. There's a sense that we're all in this together. We're all affected by the decision that we make today. And so it's very common for fundraising barbecues to be held right where the voting is. So, and elections are held on a Saturday so that fewer people have to take time off work to be able to get there. And someone else says, the voting centres are organised by an independent commission so that they are everywhere and well staffed, which means that it's uncommon to wait more than a few minutes to be able to vote. There's even voting teams that visit prisons, hospitals, and nursing homes so that everyone who is entitled can get their vote. And so hearing about how many people are disenfranchised here in this country is very saddening. And someone else writes, I was 18 and feeling very anti-government, and I didn't want to cast a vote for either of the majority parties. So I wrote some anarchist song lyrics on my ballot instead. Looking back, I feel ashamed of doing it because I should have informed myself to vote for minor parties. And I also should have realized that voting in a democracy is a privilege that not everyone has, and so I shouldn't take it for granted. Yeah. So I don't know the situation here in the US, really. I haven't lived here long enough, and I haven't read enough. And I don't have the context of understanding the education system in terms of what supports and encourages students to give their participation in democratic processes like voting for political leaders. But I did find it interesting in doing some reading that according to the Sanders Foundation, in the United States, at the age of 18, every American male is automatically sent a letter telling him that he could potentially be called for the draft. But in contrast, not a single American is automatically registered to vote in the same way. So it's curious to me, the message that is being sent here about the priorities of civic engagement and social expectations. So to go back to one of the quotes from the Australians before, I'm touched by the expression or the sense of, we're all in this together. We're all affected by the decisions that we make today. We should all vote. And this so clearly embodies the Buddha's teachings on interdependence, love, compassion, and that our actions have an ethical dimension. Certain causes lead to particular effects. And this is where I clearly see that engaging in democratic processes that affect the health and well-being of all citizens in a country cannot be pigeonholed as a political issue outside the realm of what monastics can speak about. Rather, this is an ethical and human rights issue that is the responsibility of all citizens to engage with for their own welfare as well as for others. And the Buddha clearly talked about the responsibilities that people have towards each other at various levels of society to ensure the health and well-being of the citizenry. And there's a beautiful book called The Buddha's Teachings on Social and Communal Harmony that Bhikkhu Bodhi has translated from the various Pali Sutras. And in the introduction to one section, Bhikkhu Bodhi writes, although he had adopted a life of a shramana, a renunciate who stood outside all social institutions, from the distance he looked back into the social institutions of his time and suggested ideals and arrangements to promote the spiritual, psychological, and physical well-being of people still immersed in the confines of the world. The Buddha apparently saw the key to a healthy society to lie in the fulfillment of one's responsibilities towards others. He regarded the social order as a tapestry of overlapping and intersecting relationships, each of which have imposed on people duties with respect to those other people in which they're in relationship with. So in various sutras, the Buddha made very clear the types of roles and responsibilities and duties different levels of society have towards each other in order for all beings to be able to enjoy a satisfactory standard of living and to dwell in peace and harmony. And thus, in the context of the USA right now, with so much at stake looking at the proposed policies of the leading political parties, it seems so urgent that citizens really use their privilege, their responsibility to vote in a way that ensures the well-being of everyone in this country. And to see this not as a political issue, but rather as an ethical one, because it's by exercising our right to vote that we can at least begin to choose non-harm, compassion, love, and ethical conduct as reflected in the policies that address climate change, the management of the pandemic, structural racism, and the level of access that Americans have to affordable health care, the status of immigrant workers, and so on. So with less than 2 weeks to the election, I urge you to vote, to touch into that sense of responsibility towards others, and to vote for policies that will benefit the American people in terms of alleviating the gross suffering of all kinds that we're hearing about every day in the news. And further, at this time when there are obstacles to being able to vote seem so high, such as voter ID requirements, language barriers, voter roll purges, polling place closures, reduced early voting, and so on. Help others in whatever way you can so they can vote as well. And for some, discouragement may have set in, or distrust of this democratic process as a way for reform or for positive change. And so what comes to mind here is Barack Obama's words in a town hall that happened a few months ago, where he said that we must engage in various avenues for change. That voting is just one piece of the puzzle that, together with other actions such as nonviolent protest, civil disobedience, and other forms of social engagement, that these all create the necessary causes and conditions for things to be able to shift in a good direction. And then to bring us back to this bigger perspective of multiple lifetimes and working towards the goal of full awakening, then that can also help help ourselves let go of expectations of immediate results from our actions, and rather trust that by directing our body, speech, and mind towards benefiting others through social engagement, that intention and that action will have very far-reaching positive effects for ourselves and for others.